Marriage is forever, even if you suffer. Does God really want you to live unhappily rather than get a divorce? My name is Anna Christine. I'm 52 years old, a teacher, and I've been a Christian for as long as I can remember. I grew up hearing that marriage was sacred, that once married, only death could separate me from my husband. I believed this for years. I lived to make it work, but deep down, I carried a question that haunted me night after night. Does God really expect me to stay married, even if it means spending the rest of my life unhappy? Carlos, my husband, was my first and only love. When we got married, I was just 25, full of dreams, believing we were building a life together. As the scripture says in the beginning, everything seemed perfect. He was attentive, loving, someone I admired. But as the years went by, that man I vowed to love for the rest of my life started to feel like a stranger in our own home. The affection faded, sweet words were replaced by silence and indifference. His touch became rare, and his gaze avoided mine. So, in our own home, I found myself alone. Still I fought. I tried to revive what we once had. I knelt countless times, asking God to restore my marriage, to bring back the man who once made me happy. But it seemed that the more I prayed, the further away he became. And then a thought emerged that I never had the courage to voice. What if things never go back to how they were? What if that story that began with so much love had already come to an end? But I kept holding on to something that no longer existed. Just thinking about this felt like a sin. At least that's what I had learned. Divorce wasn't an option. That's what the church said, what my family said, what I told myself every time I looked in the mirror and saw an unhappy woman. I tried to find reasons to stay. God hates divorce, they told me. Marriage is an unbreakable covenant, they repeated. So I stayed, and over time I accepted that this was my life. It should be. After all, Carlos never hit me, never cheated on me, never forbade me from anything. But was that really enough to justify spending a lifetime next to someone who no longer loved me? The hardest part was realizing I couldn't talk about it with anyone. If I confided in any of the church sisters about my unhappiness in marriage, the response was always the same. Pray more, fast, be submissive, endure. But did God really create me to live in a loveless marriage? I didn't want to sin. I didn't want to rebel against the principles that had always guided my life. Yet at the same time, I couldn't ignore that inner voice asking, what if you're wrong about all of this? The doubts suffocated me, and every time I searched for answers, it seemed I only found more judgment. If I stayed, I would suffer. If I left, I might be risking my salvation. Did God really want me to live like this? Would he rather see his daughter trapped in a loveless marriage than allow her to start over? Then, on an ordinary day, something happened, something that completely changed my perspective on everything I believed, something that helped me finally understand the answer I'd been seeking for so long. But this answer didn't come from a pastor, nor from a book, nor from a prayer. It came from a place no one wants to be, from the other side of life. I don't remember the fall. I don't remember the exact moment my body hit the cold living room floor. I only remember the silence. A silence so deep, so complete, it seemed to swallow everything around me. Before that, the last thing I felt was a slight dizziness, as if my body suddenly weighed more than the world around me. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision, and then, without warning, darkness took over. But I remained conscious. It was strange because I knew something was wrong. I could hear muffled voices in the distance as if they were, behind a very thick wall. Cries, desperation, my name being called, but I couldn't answer. That's when I realized I was looking at myself. My body lay motionless on the living room floor. My eyes were closed, my skin pale and my chest still. Around me chaos, a phone being snatched up hurriedly, someone crying, a nervous voice asking if I could hear, but I couldn't, because I was no longer there. A wave of panic flooded every part of whatever I was at that moment. I wanted to go back to scream for someone to help me, but before I could even grasp what was happening, something began pulling at my body, or my soul, or whatever part of me still existed. It was a terrible sensation. It felt like I was being ripped away from everything I knew. There was no ground, no walls, nothing around me, just a dark, deep, formless, endless void, and I was sinking deeper and deeper. Fear took hold of me. I tried to fight it, tried to hold on to something, but there was nothing to grasp. My thoughts were confused. What was happening? Was this death? Was God there? Then from the depths of the darkness, voices began to emerge. First, low, distant whispers, as if coming from all directions at once. Voices I didn't recognize, murmuring words I couldn't understand. Suddenly screams. Screams of despair, screams of pain, cries that seemed to come from everywhere, as if a crowd was suffering around me, even though I couldn't see them. My heart, if I still had one, raced. A chill ran through whatever was left of my body, and a fear I had never known before took over me. Then I heard a single voice clearer than all the others, a voice sharp, almost mocking, yet heavy with a weight that made me tremble. Now you know. My mind spun. I knew what I knew. What was. Happening became clear as I began to see around me. Shadows took form, distorted silhouettes. Some looked human, others did not. Some moved slowly, others stood still, but all wore the same expression of terror. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. I tried to close my eyes, but they were already shut. Then something changed. A faint light shone in the distance, and with that light, memories started to return. I remembered my doubts, the sleepless nights spent wondering if I was sinning by wanting to separate. I remembered the burden I had carried for years, the fear of being condemned, the fear of being wrong. And in that moment I realized where I was, or rather, where I might be. Because at that moment, I knew. I knew what awaited those who made the wrong choice. I grew to understand that maybe all I had heard about divorce was true. What if God really did hate divorce? What if by trying to escape an unhappy life, I had doomed myself to something far, far worse? But before I could let that thought consume me, something happened. The light grew brighter, illuminating everything around me, and the shadows started to fade away. And then I saw. The light was intense, but it didn't blind me. Instead, it seemed to reach into every part of me, as if searching for something I couldn't hide. I felt my body, if I even still had one, warming up, yet at the same time a strange sensation wrapped around me. It was as if that light knew everything about me, my doubts, my sins, my deepest fears. Nothing was hidden there. That's when I realized I was no longer in that place of shadows and lost voices. Everything around me had changed. The ground, which hadn't existed before, now felt solid beneath my feet, although it wasn't exactly earth. The air had a weight to it, but it wasn't suffocating. And in front of me, something or someone approached. At first I saw only a silhouette. It was tall, imposing. Then, as the light softened, I began to make out its shape. My heart, or what was left of it, raced. My body trembled like never before, because I just knew, who stood before me. It wasn't fear. It was reverence, a recognition deep within my soul. Every fiber of my being screamed what my mind was still trying to grasp. It was him. My mouth went dry. I wanted to speak, but no words came out. My legs shook, a lump formed in my throat, and before I realized it, tears were streaming down my face. But these weren't tears of sorrow. It was as if, for the very first time, I was completely exposed before someone who saw all of me and still did not reject me. Then he spoke. Anna, my name. Just that. Yet in that moment it felt as if the entire universe had paused to listen. Questions flooded my mind, but my mouth stayed shut. I wanted to explain, to justify, to say I didn't know if I was right or wrong, that I only wanted to do what was right. But before I could say anything, he continued. Are you afraid? A chill ran through me. Yes, I was afraid. Afraid of being damned, afraid of having made the wrong choice, afraid of being there because I had displeased God. But how did he know? As if he didn't need to ask, He already knew everything. Then silence filled the room. Not an uncomfortable silence, but one heavy with meaning. Suddenly, images began to appear around me, as if I were inside a dream, yet everything felt incredibly real. I saw myself younger, dressed as a bride, my face radiant, my heart full of hope. My wedding day. The day I promised eternal love, the day I believed I would never be alone again. The scene shifted. Now I sat at a table, holding my wedding ring, spinning it between my fingers. My face was tired, my eyes red from crying. I knew exactly what day it was, the day I realized the love I once had was gone. Another scene, me kneeling by the bed, praying, begging for an answer, for guidance. And then, the last image, me, at the very moment I collapsed to the floor. The instant I died. The shock made me shudder. What did this mean? Was it judgment? It was showing me all the things I had done wrong. That's when I heard that voice again. What have you learned? I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because for the first time I realized I had no answer. For years I had searched for justification, something to give me absolute certainty about what was right and what was wrong. But now, standing before him, I understood that my greatest concern had never been about right or wrong. It had always been fear, fear of condemnation, fear of judgment, fear of making mistakes. But there, in that moment, there was no fear, only a truth I still couldn't fully grasp. Then, the scene around me faded away, everything turning white for a moment. When I could see again, I realized something had changed. I was no longer in that place. Now I stood before something even more magnificent. I had never seen anything like it. The place where I was didn't seem to follow any human logic. It wasn't a temple, it wasn't a courtroom, it wasn't heaven or hell. But there was such an intense, overwhelming presence that I knew this was the place where the truth would be revealed. There was no escape. The feeling of being completely exposed remained. I felt small but not insignificant. Fragile, yet at the same time supported by something I couldn't explain. I knew I couldn't lie. I couldn't pretend. And in that moment I also realized there were no more excuses, no justifications, no convenient interpretations. Then he spoke again. "Anna, what do you believe a commitment is?" I blinked a few times, trying to form an answer, but my mind was a tangled mess of confused thoughts. "A commitment is a promise," I murmured, my voice trembling, "something that must be kept." There was silence, and then, as if I were in a movie, images started to appear around me. But this time they didn't just show my life, they showed stories. Stories of people I didn't know, but who somehow seemed connected to me. I saw a very young woman crying at the altar of an empty church. I saw her hands shaking as she took the ring off her finger. Her heart seemed broken, but her eyes held a determination that seemed to cost her every last bit of strength. I saw a man alone, holding an old photograph, his eyes full of regret. He had betrayed his wife. He had lost everything. I saw a mother with her young children trying to stay strong while on a piece of paper. Her marriage had been a battlefield. Her body still bore scars, not only visible ones but internal as well. Then I saw something that took my breath away. An elderly couple sitting side by side, holding hands. The love between them was still alive, but there was something more there. A weight, something left unsaid. And then I realized, not all marriages are the same. Not all stories have the same ending. And for the first time I felt a question arise within me. Did God see marriage the same way for everyone? Before I could think more about it, his voice echoed once again. "The covenant I made with man has always been about the heart, never just about rules." My eyes widened, and then he continued. "How many wear rings on their fingers, but have already broken their vows in their hearts? How many marry only out of convenience and never out of love? How many live together for decades but have never truly become one in spirit? And how many have been separated by the hardness of men's hearts, yet remain united before me?" I felt my body tremble because deep down, I already knew the answer. I did not create marriage to be a prison. I created it to be a living covenant. Then new images appeared, this time passages from Scripture. I saw Moses speaking to the people about the certificate of divorce, saw Jesus confronting the Pharisees about the hardness of their hearts. I saw Paul advising against being unequally yoked. And then I heard his voice again, this time more firmly. What I have always desired is a love that reflects my love for you, but what you have done is turn marriage into a lifeless law, a burden that oppresses rather than frees. My mind was spinning. I had always feared breaking a commandment, worried about displeasing God, but in that moment, I realized I might never have fully understood his will. Then he said something that made everything inside me freeze. Now that you've seen, now that you understand, are you still afraid? My breath caught because at that moment I knew the choice had always been mine. But the question remained, what would I do now? I wanted to respond, to say no, that the fear was gone, that now I understood everything. But that wasn't true. I still felt that knot in my chest, that feeling that something inside me was still trapped. The silence between us stretched on endlessly. I looked at him, but it felt like I was looking into myself, as if he were forcing me to confront everything I had spent years trying to ignore. The fear was never just about divorce. It was never merely about being right or wrong. The fear was about everything I thought I knew about God, about marriage, about what was right and wrong. And now, everything felt different. That's when I sensed something around me shift. The light that once surrounded me began to fade, and slowly, I realized we were no longer alone. People started appearing around us. At first, they were distant figures, almost like shadows. But as my eyes adjusted, I began to recognize some faces. I saw women, some older, others far too young. Some wore simple clothes, while others seemed weighed down by a lifetime of struggle. Some had vacant stares, while others had eyes filled with tears. And then I understood. They were like me. Each of them had a story, and each carried the same doubts I had carried. Some had stayed in broken marriages out of fear of offending God. Others had divorced, spending the rest of their lives believing they would never be forgiven. Then, one of them turned to me. I never knew the truth. Her voice was soft but heavy with pain. I lived with a man who never loved me. I endured harsh words, painful silence, countless reminders that I wasn't enough. I thought that if I were a better wife, if I prayed more, fasted more, God would change my marriage. But he never did, and I spent my whole life trying to convince myself that this was what God wanted for me. Another woman, younger, approached. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying for a long time, and I, on the other hand, couldn't take it anymore. I left, but I was taught that by doing so, I became impure. I was told I could never marry again, that I was doomed. I tried to move on, tried to start over, but I was always afraid of being outside God's will. I spent years wondering if I still had salvation. My heart clenched with every word, because those voices could have been mine. And then I heard his voice again. How many carry burdens I never placed on them? I swallowed hard. How many live in guilt for what's past, without ever asking me what my true will is? A heavy silence fell over us all, because deep down we knew the answer. We spent our lives listening to what men said about God, but how many of us actually asked him? How many of us truly sought the truth, without fear of what we might find? And then, I felt something shift inside me. The finger didn't disappear all at once, but something inside me began to loosen, as if chains I hadn't even known were there were breaking. And in that moment I knew something was about to happen. I felt at first a slight tremor within me, a subtle vibration, as if something was being displaced, torn from the depths of my soul. Then came the clarity, not like a shout or a sudden realization, but like a tide slowly receding, revealing everything that had been hidden before. The chains were falling apart. I never knew I was carrying them. I never noticed their weight. I felt the relief of seeing them drop through a mystical connection, everything that for so long had shaped my decisions, my view of God, my ideas of right and wrong. And now, what would I do with this freedom? I looked around. The women who were there with me were still watching. But something in their eyes had changed. They felt it too. They understood. But the unspoken question hanging in the air was the same for all of us. If God didn't create us to live in chains, if He never wanted us to carry fear and guilt, then what comes next? My mind went back to my own marriage, the silent nights, the anguished prayers, the questions that never had answers. I remembered the moment I realized that love had already left, but I stayed out of fear of what people would say. Now, that prison no longer existed. But what would happen if I took a step forward? That was when I heard His voice one last time. The truth sets you free, but do you have the courage to live it? My body shuddered. Yes, I understood that God never wanted to see me chained to a loveless marriage, to an empty relationship, to a bond that existed in name only. Yes, I realized that it wasn't divorce that saddened Him, but the way we go through life carrying a fear that never came from Him. But now, what if I met someone? If one day I loved again, if someone came into my life and I wanted to start over, could I? Or would that be the choice that would condemn me? The ground beneath my feet disappeared. Everything around me dissolved in an instant. My heart raced because I knew this was the question I still didn't have the courage to ask, and the answer could change everything. Now that I've returned, now that I've seen the truth, can I get married again? This question echoed inside me like thunder, because now it wasn't just about divorce. If God didn't want me bound to a dead marriage, then what would He say about a new beginning? Is marrying again a fresh start in God's eyes, or would it be an even bigger mistake? I thought I had all the answers, but now I realize the toughest doubt hasn't been answered yet. And if you've ever wondered this too, then you need to see what comes next. Watch the next video, because what happens to those who choose to marry again might be very different from what you've always believed.